This Steve Jones Show podcast is now loading. The Steve Jones Show podcast is presented by Sunbury Motor Company, Purdy Insurance, and Brewers Outlet. Bringing you an in-depth look at Penn State sports and more. This is the Steve Jones Show on News Radio 1070 WKOK. The Steve Jones Show is presented by Brewers Outlet, Sunbury Motor Company, and Purdy Insurance. Now from the Sunbury Motor Studio, here's Steve Jones.
Sunbury Motors, 4th Street in Sunbury. Sunbury Motors Kia, routes 11 and 15 in Hummel's Wharf, and online at sunburymotors.com. Ford, Kia, Hyundai, the best in new inventory. All with great warranties, and not only that, but also, to their credit, I mean, you look at the new vehicles, the safety features are unbelievable. All the sensors and everything else that go into it. Man, it's so impressed. And it's something where if I hadn't bought new from Sunbury Motors, maybe I really wouldn't have had a full handle and feel for that. But it is really, really incredible. Now, pre-owned inventory, hey, that's something that may be what fits your budget. And I get that. And they have a lot filled with great pre-owned inventory. I mean, great pre-owned inventory. And I think it's important that you have it as easy a buying experience as possible. And to their credit, they do that. And last week they gave me a piece of copy and it said, hey, by the way, pre-owned 18 Explorers and Escapes now in the pre-owned lot. And last but absolutely not least, great service department to back it all up. You're talking about just a quick lane, inspections, routine, difficult. They handle it all at Sunbury Motors, 4th Street in Sunbury. Sunbury Motors Kia, routes 11 to 15, almost Wharf, online, sunburymotors.com. I think you saw that Smith Vilbert entered the transfer portal, and as a grad, you can enter anytime you want. You have different rules when you have your degree, which he does. Was I surprised by it? Yeah, I was. I was like, oh, really? That one kind of caught me a little bit. And so we'll see what he does, where he wants to go, what he wants to do. And guy I like, he's just had so many doggone injuries. It's unbelievable how many injuries he's had that have set him back. So you move forward. And, of course, right now they've had one winter workout. I think the next one's tomorrow morning, I believe, based on the schedule I have. And I'm here in Bloomington because Penn State basketball tonight against Indiana. And that'll be 8:30 tonight. I'm beginning at 8. Todd, welcome. I know we have Adam Rittenberg today.
Yes, sir. How are you?
Doing well. Doing well. Yeah, it's almost 60 degrees here today, which is refreshing.
Here, too. I came in with the windows open for the third time this week. I don't know what's going on.
That's great.
I know.
That is great. Yeah, it's getting close to the spring. We're going to make the turn into March on Saturday. And, yeah, looking forward to it very much. And you got a big hockey game coming up this weekend at Penn State. That should be big. 2 hockey games on Friday and Saturday. Minnesota coming in. So it's really cool. Yeah.
They've been playing really well. Didn't they just beat the number 1 team?
Yeah, I mean, look. Yeah, it's interesting with the rankings. I probably ought to get Brian Tripp on to talk about this. But the Paramore rankings are the ones that mean everything. the rankings of what pollsters say are irrelevant in hockey. It's nice for the interest in the sport that it's done, but there's a reality to it, and the reality is what I talk about with the AP and the coaches polls. They're great for interest. Neither one determines the national champion. It's the college football playoff rankings that eventually come out that determine who's doing what, where, and why. And I think that's the important part of it. And Penn State, I think, is up to 14 or 15 in the Paramore right now, which makes a big difference. And the fact that they were able to not only beat Michigan State, but they beat them on the road. That was really important. The fact that they beat them on the road just gave it even more of a pop, because you're trying to get to the NCAA somehow, some way. And, it's odd because you want to host games in the Big Ten tournament. But there's also there's also this, and this is the weird part of it. The weird part is this. There's also, if you go on the road, you actually may help yourself in some ways. Because if you get a road win, you're like, hey, we got a road win. Okay, great. You know what I mean? Yeah. It's one of those, it's hard to, and please don't ask me how the numbers work. It would be the equivalent of asking me how Ken Pom gets his rankings. And we've had Ken Pomeroy explain it on the show, and I didn't take any notes. So that's why I always laugh, because I'll do this with my class, and I will talk to them about using certain stats, especially in baseball. And I'll say, when you guys do baseball, do you ever use the stat war? And I'll have a few hands go up. I said, when you do football, have you guys ever used QBR? And I'll have several hands go up, and I'll ask. I said, well, how do you calculate it? And, of course, there's nobody in the room that calculate it. And I said, well, if you don't know how to calculate it, I said, that means the fan doesn't know how to calculate it. In all likelihood, there might be a couple of fans out there that know way more than we do, and they can calculate it. But I don't know. I sit there and okay. So I said, if you don't know how to calculate it, then is it a relevant stat? And so now I'm the same person that looks at Ken Pom, who does rankings, but he'll rank them 1 through 364. Okay. That's great. And I can get a handle on that because at least in his breakdowns, because I subscribe to him, in his breakdowns, he'll tell you where a team is ranked offensively, defensively, and he'll have breakdowns on 2-point shooting, 3-point shooting. I mean, all those kind of breakdowns that he puts in there, it's very detailed, which I end up using. Number of possessions, who's a low possession team, who's a high possession team, things like that. But in terms of the calculation of how anybody ends up anywhere, I don't know. Right? Same thing with WAR. I don't know what it means. Wins above replacement. And I've always used this example. The year, I think it was 2012, right? Mike Trout's a young player putting up phenomenal numbers. And those who are deep believers in sabermetrics said that he should be the MVP instead of Miguel Cabrera. And Cabrera that year did something that had not been done since 1967. He won the Triple Crown: home runs, RBIs, batting average. And credit where credit's due to him for doing it. And I told my class, I said I would have voted for Cabrera instead of Trout. And here's the reason why. The reason why was very simple. And I said, because of what Cabrera did, Detroit got to the playoffs, which meant every at-bat in the stretch run to win the division, which is what they did that year, helped them get home. I said, Trout can't help the kind of team he's on, but his at-bats in the month of September were just at-bats in games that didn't – he did everything he could to help his team win, but they weren't winning. Meanwhile, Cabrera, his at-bats probably had more, quote, pressure on them because they needed him. I said, so they got to the playoffs, I said, and wins above replacement. I said, if Mike Trout's not playing out there for the Angels, I said, instead of winning 70 games, they're going to win 60? I said, I got it. The guy replacing him isn't as good. I understand that. So it's always an interesting discussion. It's always an interesting discussion. Yeah. So, yeah.
That's something I always wish I did. Come up with something like Ken Palm did in the 2000s, where that would be my job.
Yeah.
Except for the math part. I'm not the greatest mathematician in the world.
Yeah. Jeff Sagarin, who was a professor here at Indiana University, I don't think Jeff does it anymore. He used to have the Sagarin ratings.
Oh, in USA Today, I remember those.
Yeah. And he was a professor here at IU. And I had him on the show a couple times to talk about, how he came up with stuff and things like that. And I'm always interested that people love the game so much that they want to get get more in depth into the sport because they're into it. And that's one thing that Sabermetrics has done on the baseball level. I think there are more people interested in the game because of it, because it's brought anything that brings a new fan in, I'm in favor of. Like fantasy football, fantasy baseball, whatever it is, it's brought people in because now they have an interest and suddenly they're watching games they hadn't watched before. And I think aren't we contractually obligated to mention the suit has won his fantasy league how many times in a row? Or something like that.
I missed that memo. Not touching it either.
Oh, just unreal. How can you deny excellence?
I deny a lot of things.
Including working on this show. But it's that's what. So I'm all in favor of getting people more interested in it. I mean, I think that's cool. But it is also something where, like, you can take it too far. And what always strikes me is when I think any information you have is great. And it's up to you as to how you want to use it, which is important. And when you don't use it, the Sabermetrics people get mad at you. It's like, why are you mad? I mean, I'm glad it's there, but let me broadcast the game, and it's up to me to determine right or wrong what I think is important and what doesn't fit. is I'm not going to force something in to impress the analytics department. Or it works beautifully, and I definitely fit it in because it works. And that's, and I think that's what's so, that's how you use it. But they'll get mad about it. No, I'm not here. I'm not downing your hard work, but it doesn't fit what we're talking about here because once the game starts, it's an ad lib situation, and your stat might not fit the game I'm watching at the moment. Okay. You know what I mean? It's or something else you did fit, and I used it. I mean, that's how I view it. It's all about, doing things organically. If you can do it organically, great. So, hey, this is yeah. How much of that stuff you use in written stuff?
Absolutely none.
Really?
I mean I use that I use that stuff to for deeper understanding in pro sports. Okay. I mean not to get too technical, but
high school sports it wouldn't really fit. Right?
No, and honestly, our news hole is so small these days that it's hard to be that detailed in a story to get that deep into the stats anyway.
Oh, it's a shame the news hole is so small. I was watching a weekend local newscast, and it's my fault. I don't watch local news all that often, but I happened to be watching it. And young guy was on there, and he was doing the sports, and he did one story because that's all the time they gave him. And I was like, wow, really? And I was really taken aback that he was only given a chance to do one story. Like, wow. I mean, that's how far back it's gone. I just feel like I realize things are expensive to do, and I understand that. But I don't know. I get very disappointed in that.
It's all about efficiency and profits these days. If it doesn't make a profit or isn't efficient, it's not worth doing.
Yeah, I know what you're saying, Todd. I understand that. I just feel like, well, habits are hard to break, and now I think they've done whomever has done work with Twitter, Instagram, and so forth. They've done a great job of getting people to go toward them as the source for their news and have devalued newspapers or TV sports or whatever it happens to be. How about that? How about that theory?
There's little doubt about that. I mean, because if you read any stories on local coverage, I mean, what do we have around here? Between, us at the Item, Bloomsburg, Williamsport, Milton, State College, Harrisburg. I mean, we have a lot of local papers around here that a lot of other areas do not have that kind of coverage. And, it leads to, even on a local level, people are very uninformed about what's going on in their local governments and local school boards and things like that, just because they're not covered like they were used to even 10 years ago.
Right. No, I know. Like I said, I'm as much at fault as anybody. As I prefaced it, I was watching local news. I rarely watch local news. Now, do I get word of mouth from people as to something that happened or whatever? Yeah, I do get that. But now, I'm also in a different spot too. In other words, there's really almost not completely, but there's almost nothing a local news report is going to report on Penn State football or Penn State basketball, for example, that I don't already know, only because I'm there. You know what I mean? So it's not like, so I'm in a different spot, so I understand that. Yeah. Now on other stuff, not so much. In other words, I'll check out different news outlets to see what's going on with Penn State wrestling, or I'll talk to Brian Tripp about what's going on with Penn State hockey, and so forth. But when it comes, it's great. For example, when we had the Susquehanna football coach on during their playoff run, I think those interviews, aside from whatever questions I asked, okay, right, but Tom gave great perspective to everybody about what was going on with his program, and I thought that was informative for the public to hear what he had to say, just like John Griffin, what John had to say on Monday locally about what's going on. I think that's fair.
I could listen to those guys talk all the time. I love listening to Griff talk basketball.
No, he's great to talk basketball with. Tom's great to talk football with. No, I have a lot of respect for all these people. I know we have Adam Rittenberg coming on today.
He's next, actually.
Yeah, he'll be in the next half hour. I've got to get a hold of Johnny Holiday here and see if I can get Johnny on Friday's show to talk Maryland, because the great man is the great man himself. It's going to be interesting. Don Fisher's tonight, 52 years, Indiana. Johnny Holiday's 46 years. So my running joke always is I'm the baby of the group.
They still haze you.
Party time, game time, or just fun time. Doesn't matter what time it is, because it's Brewers Outlet time. The beverage supermarket has the area's largest beer selection. Imports, microbrews, ciders, and domestics. Pick from over 100 ice-cold 12-packs and dozens of 24-ounce singles. Soda, snacks, hot sauces, fresh roasted peanuts. Make it one-stop party shopping, and don't forget the pickle bar. So whatever you're celebrating or just doing it up, Brewers Outlet, Reagan Street, Sunbury wants to see you. And thank you for your years of patronage.
CBS News Brief. President Trump held his first cabinet meeting today, taking a number of questions from reporters before getting down to business. He said he has a mandate to slash federal spending.
We have cut billions and billions and billions of dollars. We're looking to get it maybe to $1 trillion.
On further reductions in the federal workforce, he said the agencies are being instructed to find where to cut. CBS's Aaron Navarro.
So while we have seen probationary employees let go, we could see even bigger numbers in the coming weeks. 2 deaths have now been reported in the measles outbreak in West Texas, the first since it began last month. CBS's Omar Villafranca is in Lubbock, Texas, on the efforts to stop the outbreak.
What they're doing is pushing testing in certain counties that are high hit, and also having clinics where people can go in and get the vaccine.
More than 120 cases have been reported across 9 counties in Texas. CBS News Brief, I'm Cammie McCormick.
The Papa John's pizza makers are in the kitchen hand-stuffing mozzarella into their fresh, never-frozen original dough to make you an epic stuffed crust pizza. They have perfected the mozzarella tuck into their original dough to make you a beautiful hand-stuffed crust. In just one epic stuffed crust pizza, the team is using 5 sticks of mozzarella cheese, so every bite is as cheesy as can be. Get a one-topping epic stuffed crust pizza for only $13.99. And this goes without saying, but don't forget to dip it in their special garlic sauce. Better ingredients, better pizza, Papa John's. Call Papa John's in Selinsgrove at 570-743-7474.
Hi, this is Season. For over 100 years, the Purdy Insurance Agency has been protecting families and businesses of the greater Susquehanna Valley and beyond. With the experience of our trained and knowledgeable staff, you can rest assured that your needs will be evaluated and met by some of the industry's best representatives. No matter what your insurance needs are, call Purdy Insurance today at 570-286-5855. Visit our website at purdyinsurance.com or check us out on Facebook to see what we can do for you.
Bringing you an in-depth in-depth look at Penn State sports and more. This is the Steve Jones Show on News Radio 1070 WKOK. The Steve Jones Show is presented by Purdy Insurance, Brewers Outlet, and Sunbury Motor Company. Now from the Sunbury Motor Studio, here's Steve Jones.
And this half hour being brought to you by our good friends at Purdy Insurance, Market Street in Sunbury. Go to purdyinsurance.com. We have lots of insurance needs: auto, home, light, business, boat, motorcycle, RV, just some of them. And we always, let's face it, when we have an insurance thing, we don't just have one, we have a bunch of them. And Purdy Insurance organizes all of them, make sure you're fully covered, and do everything they can because of customer service to make sure they save you money wherever they can. It is all at Purdy Insurance, Market Street in Sunbury. Go to purdyinsurance.com. It's always a pleasure to talk with the outstanding Adam Rittenberg. Sir, welcome. Great to have you back.
Great to be back, Steve. I'll be doing well, my friend.
I'm doing great. Thanks for asking. Adam, let's talk about New Orleans and Dallas. And I don't mean the cuisine. So let's get into what the SEC, the Big Ten, their meetings, which then led into the Dallas meetings. Is there any particular reason why something that on the surface seems simple of seeding 1 through 12 didn't get adopted in Dallas yet? What are the reasons behind that?
Well, we're still, again, just for this final year, dealing with a model where you need unanimous approval to change anything. And, you know, if you're sitting there and you're Jim Phillips or you're Brett Yormark or you're Gloria Nevarez and you're representing one of those other conferences and you see where this whole thing is going and you see the Big Ten and the SEC having these meetings and working together, which, again, is still a little shocking for those of us who have been around the Big Ten at least for a while, that's happening. You know, you can sense just the power grab and that continues to take place. And so even though, you know, they probably know that the next, you know, beginning in 2026, you're not going to have the exact model like we have right now where you do have those automatic buys for the 4 highest-rated conference champions. I get it to a degree that they would put their foot down and say, you know what, we're not going to give you that right now. We're going to keep it the way it is. It was still a successful playoff. Obviously, it benefits our champions to have that bye into the semifinal round, and we're not going to give in yet. So I guess that's the only thing I would say because it looked awkward, you know, with certain teams slotted the way that they did, and you could see the differences in talent when Penn State played in its quarterfinal and so forth. But those conferences are certainly looking out for their own interests, just like the Big Ten and the SEC are.
Yeah. Correct me if I'm wrong about this. So, in other words, if you got the bye, like Boise State and Arizona State did, into the quarterfinals, that really was an $8 million payday and not $4 because of the bye. Is that right?
Yeah, I believe that's right too. So there's obviously a financial component as well to keeping it this way. But here's the thing that people need to know: like the system was always going to go through this first cycle of 12 years, and then it was going to change and potentially change dramatically. Now there was certainly momentum to increase the number of teams before the end of the cycle, and that's why we are where we are. Where we have this sort of 2-year gap where we have 12 teams, but we still have some of the old policies as far as governance and changing rules, needing unanimous consent. All those things are still in place until the end of this contract.
All right, so now the idea of going to 14 or 16, what's your sense as to, what might get discussed April and then in May about that? Because that's the transition time when they start looking ahead to 26 and beyond. Do you have any read on that, Adam?
Well, I think it's very clear that the SEC and Big Ten would like that to gain serious consideration to increase the number of teams, because that will mean more access for those two conferences in all likelihood, and that's something that Tony Petitti, coming from Major League Baseball and having worked with all the professional sports and seeing the expansion of those sports from a postseason standpoint. He's talked to me and others about how it's hard to replicate that down the stretch feeling when your team still has a chance. And I think that a lot of people that weren't in college football looked at the sport from the outside and said, why is this thing so exclusive? Yes, you have this great regular season, but you have a bunch of teams and fan bases that are, essentially checked out by mid to late October. And by expanding the playoff to 12 and possibly to 14 or 16, you keep a lot more people engaged. And, if you're a Big Ten or SEC fan, that's certainly a good thing because, as we saw even with this first system, your teams are going to gain more consideration for the at-large spots than teams from, say, the Big 12 or the ACC.
Then contracts are in place for conference championship games. What becomes of them in a conference, in a playoff expansion, in your opinion?
Well, I think they'll still take place, but I think that those days are being looked at differently. Do we just have a conference championship game? Do we still have? Do we have another week of regular season football for the teams that don't meet in the conference championship to position themselves for the playoff? I mean, as exciting as the Big Ten championship game was this year, certainly for your listeners, Penn State being back there to take on Oregon, that was an entertaining game, as was the SEC game, which was a very close game, went into overtime. There was no drama as to whether those teams were going to get into the college football playoff. Now, there was drama as far as who would win and who would get that automatic bye, and Oregon and Georgia were those teams. But with the likelihood of that going away, most of those conference championship games are just going to be for that, the conference championship, not necessarily anything that matters beyond as far as the playoff, because both teams will have already qualified. And so if you're able to do more of a full slate and kind of a wild card weekend, so to speak, I could see there being some real appeal to that. Now, logistically, how do you do it, and when are the games played, and all of that? But this is still a sport with a relatively short season. I was thinking about this in comparison to basketball. This basketball season, if you followed it from November to now, feels like it's gone on forever. And even though college football, the season is longer, it does seem to go by a lot faster. And so by adding another weekend of games, maybe not for every team in a league, but for those top teams that are trying to get into the college football playoff, that would be really exciting, I think, if it was done right, and add some drama, to a weekend that I think lacks a lot of it now.
The championship game this year was the 20th. I think this upcoming season it's the 19th, but the year after that, because of how the calendar works out, it's like the 25th of January. How important is it for them to look at the calendar so that this season fits, but it also fits dates the right way? Because they're not going to get any cooperation from the NFL. So, what about the date part of it?
Yeah, I think it's another discussion point. I think we did a project at ESPN a couple of years ago where we reimagined the calendar, and one of the things we settled on was to start the season earlier with bigger games and maybe bowl games at the start of the season as opposed to the end of the season. How can we figure out a way to wrap up the sport closer to where it was in the BCS era or even in the 14 playoff era, and not going through the entire month of January, because that obviously impacts the portal, it impacts coaching changes, both within the college realm and from college to the NFL and vice versa. So I think there's some real challenges, with the sport and the season getting longer. Is there anything that can be done as far as when the season starts? Do you do anything with Army-Navy weekend? Do you figure out a way to start playoffs earlier? For a long time, we would hear from the presidents, and they didn't want a conflict with final exams. I'm not hearing a whole lot of that anymore. So, because there's money to be made, as usual. I mean, college presidents, God bless them, and they're obviously very accomplished people, but they're at their core, they are elite fundraisers. And so if they're bringing money in, some of those other things seem to go by the wayside, and that's just the way it is. But maybe there is some flexibility there. I think you could certainly look at starting the season the last weekend of August, which is currently week 0, as opposed to after Labor Day or Labor Day weekend rather, and maybe you're able to shorten the end of the season as well.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I've heard a lot about week 0. The other part is and this is something that's talked about a lot, but nothing's happened. For example, let's go talk to the NFL about scheduling Saturday regular season games against the playoff. Well, excuse me, over here in the back, who do you send? I mean, who's going to represent you? There's no commissioner of football. There's no commissioner of basketball. And so in this vacuum, Greg Sankey and Tony Petitti have stepped up in the vacuum. They've taken advantage of it. Is there any thought process about a commissioner for football, a commissioner for basketball, beyond just the thought of it?
Well, I think it's something that I laugh at first, Steve. Not at the question. It's a good question because it's something that's been talked about for a decade, and it doesn't seem to be any closer to truly happening. Even though there have been some massive changes in the sport, and it's something that again, I'm hopefully going to visit with Tony Petitti here again soon. It's something I like to ask him because essentially. If you're Tony or Greg, are you giving up power to that person? Like does that person serve you? Is it a person that serves your conferences? Right. Because there's there's sort of this chatter in the background about like who's looking out for the best interest of the sport, and it's kind of just shouted into the air and then disappears into the ether. Like it doesn't gain any real momentum. I think we all would like to see that. We would like to see some type of centralized college football body, or at least somebody who can advocate, who has respect. I mean, Nick Saban's name has been brought up. I think he would be a very effective commissioner of the sport. But is it something that the Big Ten and the SEC and the others could truly get on board with to support that person, not just to complain to that person? And would they give that person the power and authority and respect to do their job effectively? I mean, that's what it really comes down to. Otherwise, it's just a ceremonial title. I mean, I like Bill Hancock. He's a really nice guy, and he represented the college football playoff for a lot of years, but he didn't have the juice that Greg Sankey and Jim Delaney had. Anyone who covers the sport knows that they had much more power than the head of the college football playoff, and that would be my concern with the college football commissioner is this just a symbolic position, or is this somebody whose word and actions carry real clout?
I'm going to ask you about Greg and Tony in a moment, but I want to ask about the fact that in roster limits, it'll be 105 for football. We all know basketball is going to go up to 15. At 105, Penn State with walk-ons probably carried about 124. Right? Well, that's 19 fewer guys, and, of course, those are the walk-ons. Have you talked to coaches or even the commissioners about that? Because I've talked about, hey, look, I'm 5 on 105 with scholarships, but like a 15-person practice squad on top of that to keep that door open. But is there any even thought process about beyond 105, or is it too early for anybody to ask?
Well, I think it was hard to get to that number to begin with, and I think there's certainly sympathy towards those who are impacted negatively by it, but maybe there's opportunities then to play at a different level instead of being a walk-on. And I think coaches certainly are disappointed, and understandably so. And you look at the number of programs where walk-ons have had such a big impact on a game or a season or what have you, and what happens to those people here going forward. But yeah, it's obviously an item on a list that's growing and growing, given the realities of college athletics and the overall financial picture. But it's something that as commissioners, Greg and Tony have to pay attention to, just like the other commissioners, and coaches have to obviously work with what they have given to them, which is obviously the 105 number going forward.
Okay, and the final question for you, Adam, before I let you go, and thanks a lot for your time today. I really appreciate it. Tony Petitti, I've talked to a few times now, so I've got a general feel for Tony. Greg Sankey, I've never even been in the same room with, to my knowledge. So what kind of people are they in terms of how they relate to the sport and what you've picked up from each of them?
Yeah, it's interesting because, Greg is obviously, he's like a college sports lifer. I mean, his whole life has been as an administrator, at least professional life, in college sports. And so, he's been on the ground floor. He's been hands-on for his entire career, where Tony Petitti was involved in college sports from a television perspective for a number of years as an executive for different networks, but then really is much more of a pro sports person. And, I don't think this isn't a criticism of Tony, but I don't think Tony necessarily has the sentimentality about college sports of, maybe a Greg Sankey, but I'm thinking more so someone like Jim Phillips or like a career athletic director. He just has he's coming from the TV world, the pro sports world, and they look at things a little bit differently and maybe in a way that seems more business oriented or callous, and you can use different words to kind of describe it. But Tony's obviously been very, very effective in his roles and has drawn very good reviews as Big Ten commissioner so far. I think what's just fascinating is their desire and enthusiasm to work together as the two big conferences, because that really wasn't the case. I think there was respect between guys like Jim Delaney and Mike Slive, but they weren't meeting and they weren't collaborating anywhere near what we're seeing now from the Big Ten and the SEC. Again, it's a little bit jarring as someone who covered the Big Ten and who looked at the SEC, that league did as a rival, to see them meeting a couple times a year and joining forces the way that they are.
Adam, always a pleasure. Thanks so much for the extra time you gave us today. Really appreciate it.
You bet. Thanks for having me, Steve.
The outstanding Adam Rittenberg, one of the really great guys. I mean, great pro, even better guy. I just want to pass this along to everybody. Lou Prado passed away last night. And Lou was 86, almost 87. And my deepest condolences to Carol, she's incredible, and Lou's family. Lou Prado, such a special guy, the great Penn State historian, but had a long and distinguished career in media, whether it was print or TV or radio. And I bounced so many thoughts and ideas off of him over the years. Lou and I were close. And the genuine respect, love for the man. And he'd always kid me about Ron Moeller being our spotter up in the booth. And he says, yeah, your spotter missed that one, which of course meant I missed it. I said, Lou, you've been up in the booth. I said, do you see where Ron sits? He sits to the against the wall. I'm in the middle. I said, tell me what he's spotting. It's always a running joke we had between the two of us. And every time we did the Duquesne Club down in Pittsburgh, or now we're doing it at Chartiers Country Club just outside of Pittsburgh, Lou would go down every year, and Lou and I would drive down together. And it was just great spending 2 to 2.5 hours down, 2 to 2.5 hours back, just talking about the business, about life, about, how something's being run or not being run, because he was just an incredibly intelligent individual with a wealth of knowledge and a wealth of experience, and just to me was an incredible gem that I was proud to say was a friend of my life. So Lou Prado did pass away. Lou was on this show many times, as you know. And he is going to be dearly, dearly missed by me. And to Carol, my deepest condolences. Those two were so close. This has to be incredible incredibly difficult for her and to lose family. But he is somebody that this person here is going to miss dearly every day. Lou was 86. We'll come back with more in a moment here on News Radio 1070 WKOK.
This winter has been cold, but Sunbury Motors Hyundai says, let's be alive in 2025 and heat things up with their huge selection of new Hyundais now. Hurry into SMC and drive away in a 2025 Hyundai Elantra for under $22,000. That's right, a 2025 Elantra starts at just $21,728 with up to $1,792 off or 3.99% financing for 60 months. And there's 22 to choose from. 2025 all-wheel drive Hyundai Tucsons start at only $29,161. With up to $27,414 off or 2.49% financing for 60 months. And there's 42 available. Sunbury Motors continues to be this area's mid-size SUV leader with up to $6,524 off the newly redesigned 2024 Hyundai Santa Fe's or 2.99% financing for 72 months, and they start at only $40,431. They have 5 that must go now, and all have America's best warranty. Sunbury Motors Hyundai in the North 4th Street Auto Plaza, Sunbury.